My name is Alfredo Deza, and I'm a cloud advocate working with Microsoft. Today, I want to talk to you about NLP with TensorFlow. This is a workshop delivery presentation. It's not the actual presentation of the workshop. We will cover a few details of the workshop that you will need to know in order to give a successful delivery of this workshop to an audience. We'll cover some gotchas, some difficult situations that you may encounter, and how to work with those to get a good solid delivery. Let's see how we can do that. So what I'm going to be doing is going to present about how to give this workshop, which is the introduction to NLP with TensorFlow. So the idea here is if you've not done this before is or gone through this process before, is like we put together a few of these workshops for you so that you can use it and present on to other students or to other communities as well. So we we've tried to make it like super easy for you guys to we've made it super easy to YouTube. Like basically, it's kind of like a self-service. It's kind of like a self-service situation where you can just go in, pick one of these workshops, and then present. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to talk about the intro NLP TensorFlow. And although I'm going to kind of like walk you through some of the details, I'm not going to go into super details on how the NLP process is working. I'll leave that to you when you're giving that presentation. So in order for you to use these, you'll have to go to the workshop library repository where all of the workshops are. And the idea here is that you have everything you need there for every single workshop. So you can see that there's it is a public template. What that means is that if you want to fork this repository, you can copy exactly what you need and start from scratch, and then you make the changes necessary. So it's similar to a fork in a repository, but with the added benefit that you don't really care about the commits or the history of the repository. You just want the files. So it's effectively like someone copying the files into a new repository that you own. All right, so this is the repository, and in there you can see in the README there's a lot of prepared workshops, and I'll keep scrolling down, and some of those have videos. This video is recorded, so hopefully if you're watching this recording at a later moment in time, you will be able to follow through and get a good idea on how to present these. So I'm going to scroll down here, and this is where we're at today. Use TensorFlow and Keras for natural language processing, also known as NLP, using Python and Jupyter Notebooks. So if you click here, then it will take you to this README on the folder inside the workshop library, and this is what we're going to cover today. Now, let's start getting into this workshop, and at the very top, you will always have an association to a Learn module. In this case, you'll see that it's Introduction to NLP with TensorFlow. So if I click this, and I'll have to make this a little bit bigger so that you guys can see it better. There we go. So this is on parallel to what you will be presenting. So this is supporting information. My recommendation is that before giving this workshop, and I think this applies to pretty much every other workshop, is that you should go through it all on your own. Like when I was preparing this workshop, trying to get everything together for you, I went through it and try to see like, is this making sense? Is there something that is missing? And I actually found a couple of issues that I'll tell you in a second. Luckily, those issues have been fixed, but you might be finding things that are like, like this doesn't make sense, or I don't know about this, and I might get a question about this thing that I'm not sure about, so let me find out a little bit more. So that will allow you to be more prepared for giving this workshop, giving this presentation, and be successful at it. So again, you have the learning module here, and so the idea here is that again, you go through the whole learn module and then you get used to it. So that's one thing. We'll go into detail about the learn module in a second. The other thing that I want to tell you about is that all of these workshops come with slides ready for you to use and adapt and to make changes as you need. The slides are in the repository itself, and you can see here that is right there. Yeah, and you click on them and then you will download them. I've pre-downloaded those so that I can show you how that looks. And these are the slides that come in the repo for this workshop. So the slides here are, you can see here like a speaker name, and you can change those, adapt those. I think this is super ultra small, so let me make it much bigger. All right, I think that's good. So the idea here is that you go in, well, you put your name. I might be co-presenting with someone else, so you can do that. And then again, just like the Learn module, just like the workshop that I'm presenting today, my recommendation, please go through the whole slide and see, like, let me make these changes, or ooh, it looks perfect just like it is. And I'm gonna just reuse it and just put my name and make some minor changes. I think for this one, I did do a couple of changes to the slides, and it will take you step by step. In this case, we have the prerequisites, basic Python knowledge, basic understanding of machine learning. You're gonna do a little bit of machine learning because we're doing natural language processing. We're gonna analyze a little bit of text, and we're gonna do it with Python. So a little bit of those are prerequisites. It also covers the learning objectives, and it tells you like what is it that you will learn once this workshop is complete. And then the agenda is basically what we're going to be doing while the workshop is moving along. And the slides will go and help you step by step for every single section of the workshop that you will be working with, you'll be presenting to others. And again, I recommend you to go through them and get a feel about what is it that the content is and how does it look, and make any changes. You might be wanting to add more graphics, or you might say, well, I have like an architectural diagram or something that I've created that I want to include in these slides. Certainly you can do so. This is kind of like a starting point. Good to use as is, but if you want to put your personal touch in it and make it extra special, you can certainly do that. That's the benefit of having the slides ready to go. Some of these slides have the knowledge check in it, and I'll cover in a second what the knowledge check is, but it basically will ask you some questions, and you can use these questions to either interact with your audience. So feel free to remove the knowledge check from the slides, as those are also included in the Learn module. So this is kind of like useful if you want to have like a starting point for having a discussion, perhaps, and say, hey, like, what do you think would happen if we had like less text to analyze, or use one of these questions as a starting point. So once you complete the slides, you can see here there's a lot of different questions. You'll have a summary, and again, you can add to the summary with anything that you think will be useful. And of course, the next steps, there's other things that you can do to tell your audience, hey, like the next step, try these things, try using this other Learn module over here, or perhaps use different types of text to do analysis on it. So those are the slides. And now I'll be going back to the Learn module. And actually, before we go into the Learn module, let me go back to the repository. One of the, and I think I'll change these to make it a little bit more clear. There's a couple of ways that you can deliver these workshop or that your audience can interact with you while you're delivering this workshop. So this is a very hands-on workshop. As you are making progress, your audience might want to follow you along. So in this case, I thought, well, the audience will need Python, will need Visual Studio Code, and set up VS Code for data science. So we'll have to have like a good environment ready to go. But then I said, well, wait a moment. Like that's not exactly necessary because the learning module has a and I'll show you what this thing is. It has, like, if you go through the learn module over here, and we start representing text. Well, you have the introduction, and once you go into the introduction, it goes through some of the basics, like what is text classification, what is sentiment analysis, which we're gonna, this learning module is going to cover a little bit, and then it tells you that you're good to go, and then the next unit is representing text as tensor, so it's getting onto the hands-on portion of it, and I have that open right here. And when it opens with a sandbox, the ability for you to just click, like if you've never used it, it's a way of, you enable it, like you click a button, you say, hey, yes, I really want to activate the sandbox. And what it is like it creates like a sort of like a virtual machine or like a compute instance attached from the cloud through the browser, attached to these Jupyter Notebooks. So it is a Jupyter Notebook on the browser within the Learn module, which is pretty cool. And it has everything that you need. So in that case, this is kind of like why I was a little bit hesitant to say, well, you really need to have VS Code installed and with Python and all of your tools and plugins. You can certainly do that. But this is very easy because everything comes there by default. And so that's one of the things to note, one of the things to be aware. And I'll make sure I send an update to the repository so that you're aware that this is an option, because I think I didn't make it super clear. So I actually did. Look at that. Like I thought about this and I already done it. So you can activate the sandbox environments in each module, or alternatively, set up your local environment. So if you do want to set up your local environment, yes, you will need to install Python and set up the setup Visual Studio Code for data science. That's a short YouTube video that walks you through all of the elements that you might need when you're working with VS Code and installing all of the dependencies that you need. And then this is not absolutely necessary to do this pip install. It's also on the notebook itself. Now, to make things easier, I would recommend going through the sandbox route. If I go here, I think let's see how that process looks like activating a sandbox. Hopefully, it doesn't ask me one. Yeah, well, it already activated. Like it went right away and saying like this is the same sandbox that you activated. But and you have a limit as well. You can see here I've used one of 10 sandboxes for today. And once you activate one, it's available for 2 hours. So this should be plenty of time for you to just play with it. I'm going to scroll down here. So you'll go through these cells and going through the text and the actions. Let's try to walk through one of these and see how that behaves. And then I'll show you a couple of other things that you can do with the Jupyter Notebook. So first it will have these, and this looks kind of weird because you might feel like, well, why is there a pip install over here? Well, I'm going to run it. So what this is doing is installing the dependencies. Remember, this is a remote compute that lives in the cloud and it's coming through the web browser. And in order for this to be workable, it's going to start installing dependencies. You must install the dependencies. If this is your local work environment, then you will need a virtual environment. You'll have to have Python. You'll need to make sure that TensorFlow datasets 4.4.0 is installed. So you start getting into these slight differences. Why? So this is a good reason why using the sandbox environment might be a much better idea. You don't need to deal with someone saying, "Hey, I made a typo. I did TensorFlow underscore datasets, and I didn't I got the latest, not 4.4.0, and nothing works now." Finding stuff like that out is kind of tricky. So this just removes the problems away of someone having a typo, and they can just sit back, relax, and keep hitting the play button on each cell and going through each cell and go through the classification task. Next, it fetches some resources from the web. Here, it grabs a data set, which is a very well-known one, which is the AG news, and it comes compressed. It grabs that and then decompresses that onto that remote compute instance, and then it starts to do the actual loading and working through the data set. Some of these tasks, I'm not going to go through all of them because some of them are very compute intense and might take a while. So I think that these sandbox environments kept the output of the cells, so you can actually go and see that yes, in fact, these things will, you can get a look and feel of how the output will be. So even if someone says, well, I don't really want to wait here for a few minutes and get some output, you will see that you can still work through the content, because what's important is not necessarily hitting play and getting an action, a result or output back, but kind of like walking through someone what the process looks like. And again, if you follow my recommendation of going through the whole Learn module by yourself and getting a good understanding, and perhaps do take the time to wait those few minutes when the remote compute is training your model and analyzing the text to see how it looks, and kind of like explain how that would feel like, kind of in this case, because I know I've done it and I know it will take a few minutes. So now you're aware that might be a thing. So I want to actually hit one of these things that will we'll try to get into a situation where will take a few minutes. And all of what we're doing right now, and I'm hitting play, but I'm not going into detail exactly what are the things that we're doing, because for me, the most important thing is that you feel that you're gaining the insights as to how to effectively deliver this workshop, how to be useful delivering the workshop, and what are the gotchas that you will find as you move through. If I'm just talking about how are we training the models and how are we labeling the text, in this case we're labeling the text, then I'm giving you the insights of the actual content, but not necessarily how to deliver this content. All right, so what this is doing, it's basically labeling the text, going through the words in this, like the AG news is a text-based data set that what it does is like it's an extract in text format from I think it is a news channel. And if it's not a news channel, it's like I think it's a newspaper, but it's effectively just sharing news. So you'll see things about wars and presidents and politics and economics, and there's a lot of that. All right, so then it'll take you to working with tokenizers and tokens and what those means. And it builds a vocabulary with that and uses text vectorization to accomplish this. And it'll walk you through a couple of techniques that you can use. And then right here is where you start using Keras. And Keras, I believe, comes pre-installed in this remote compute. Another benefit of using remote compute in the sandbox environment with Jupyter is that you will be ready to go. I don't think we've actually installed Keras, when we started the sandbox today. So you're going to go again. You're going to keep going through the cells. You can see here some of the you're getting some of the words. It's going through a process of cleaning up. It will be much more clear if you go through the cells and go through the content and actually get exactly what's going on. And I wanna show you. It goes to the back of words text representation, but I want to really show you what will happen. This just go through some very simple examples outside of the big data set that we downloaded in the beginning. You can see here that it's kind of like trying to explain some of the concepts, like the BOW, which is the bag of words, and how does that look with short phrases, and so that you can use those concepts later on when we're doing the transformation on the text. So in the beginning of this workshop, you're just exposing your audience to all of the concepts that will be applied to the text later on as you move through the learn module, through the different steps, through the different sections. The one that I personally like is doing text sentiment analysis. When you like read a piece of text and it's like, well, this sounds positive, or ooh, like this sounds a little bit negative. Alfredo's being negative today. Let's do some sentiment analysis in what he's saying. But I want to say that there's nothing here. I don't think there's nothing here that will take a while. Yeah, let me see. I think I skipped one. I think this one. Yeah, I think this one will take a second. There we go. Yeah. So this is one. So this is one because it's compiling, and this is basically training the model. So now it says CTA 26 seconds, not that bad. But if you don't want to be surprised. You don't want to be delivering these workshops like, my audience is going through these, and I wasn't thinking that this might be taking a while. I think it's optional really to try to train every single thing here and go through every single iteration that might take a few minutes. All in all, I don't think it should take you more than an hour, especially if you are especially if you're using the sandbox environment. If you're not using the sandbox environment and everybody's like, no, I want to use my environment. I have a super powerful computer at home and my laptop is just bleeding edge. You might get into trouble. It's like, oh, this is not working. I'm getting an error. It's like, you certainly don't want to be debugging as much. Of course, being helpful is always good, but it's just easier if you use the sandbox. So you'll get to the end. You'll train train the model, and we'll get some useful output. You expose your audience to a lot of these concepts that they can use and apply later. And I'm gonna keep scrolling down because we don't need to go through every cell. It still covers a bag of words and vectors and why is that important, and some of the math behind these models. So it'll get to a conclusion, and then it'll go through the next unit. And the next unit, it will be another notebook. And here I want to make a pause and see if anyone has a question. Like, feel free, like in the chat, if you want to ask me any questions, because again, what we're doing here is just trying to make it easy for you when you want to deliver this workshop on your own. And if something is not clear, or you're thinking that there might be something that you might need, or you might want to know better, or get some clarification, because you want to use this workshop at a later point, and I'm not making it clear, please just ask a question. Happy to pause and give you an explanation. All right, so it seems like we're good, and so I'll just continue. But in any case, just send me a add add a question in the chat, I'm happy to pause and explain. The other thing that I wanted to tell you here, you can see this is a completely new Jupyter Notebook, but it's the same sandbox. So I think it's just the ability of you just activate once and you have all of these notebooks available to you. It will go ahead and want to install these again and installs the data sets, and it grabs installs the TensorFlow underscore datasets and grabs the AG News dataset again. But what I wanted to show you here is I'm not going to go through absolutely all of the cells again. You have some options here, and I encourage you to go through some of these. But specifically, I think this one, which is the safe, is important because your audience might say, "Hey, excuse me, Alfredo, like this is really cool, but like I wanna tinker a little bit with it." Well, I mean, of course you can make changes here because this is Jupyter, so you can actually make changes there directly and execute the code. Actually, I'll show you pretty quick. And so you have to be careful with these because you don't want to mess this one up. So you can say, this is totally up to you because now this is your own. You can see Hello World is executing there. This is your own environment. Like this is not shared with anyone else. The thing that is common is the content, but the execution is specific to every single member of the audience that has logged in. So you can see here, if I scroll the way up, I've logged in. I think that's no search. So that's me, and so this sandbox environment is just me. It's just my execution is particular to me. Nobody's seen what the changes I make, and these changes are not permanent. But someone might say, like, I want to tinker with this later. I've used my 10 sandboxes for today and I ran out of time. What do I do? Well, if you hit save, it will download that IPython notebook. I think it didn't prompt me to. No, this is not this is not the save that I wanted, I think. Let me see. There we go. Not save. So save is just to keep the changes not super persistent, but just persistent for my session. So what you can do here with the 3 dots, I was slightly misleading, is that you can download these as an IPython IPyNB, an IPython notebook, a Jupyter notebook. So if you say export as notebook, and you click that, you will see here that it downloads this file over there, and then you can open it locally, and then you can interact. Like if you want to use VS Code, or you want to use some other text editor or environment that you want to make changes to it, or interact with it in your own environment, or you want to test other data sets, you can certainly do that. So that's an interesting one, because if your audience is asking, hey, like, how can I take this a step further? How can I make changes beyond what we're seeing here in the in the Learn module itself with the sandbox environment? So that's an important and useful thing to do. And you can see here that we're using Python 3.8. That's another important one, because you might be saying, you might be saying, it's like, well, when I'm using, I don't think Python 3.6 is a thing anymore, but in case you've tried it with Python 3.8 and it used to work, and you can see here it says Py3.8 underscore TensorFlow, that means that the remote compute comes already pre-packaged with a few libraries and things that you might need. So you don't need to install absolutely everything. Here we have another one with PyTorch, but TensorFlow is the one that we're using today by default. By default, this thing is just attached to that one. So again, different options, and kind of like this similar situation that you might have locally when you're running VS Code and you're saying, hey, like I want to use a different kernel, and you need to pick and choose. You have the same option here. All right, so yeah, and interrupt kernel and restart kernel. and show the variables. I mean, that's we haven't run anything, so that won't work. So going all the way to the bottom of this section in the Learn module, you will see that it goes again through some of the concepts that you'll keep applying later on. It's very intense on the concepts on the first two or three sections, I think, and then next it goes into the more practical side of things. Here's just like doing more vectorization and how does that relate to text analysis, and does a little bit with Python and Keras as well. So I'm going to keep scrolling down all the way to the end. And then capture patterns with recurrent neural networks. So now we're starting to get a little bit more interesting. If I scroll a bit up, you'll see here that I still have 41 minutes left, and it's still the same sandbox environment and still the same look and feel. So this is useful sometimes for your audience, because now they're starting to, like, if they're using the sandbox environment, they start to feel more comfortable. It's like, oh, these are the same controls that we saw like 10 or 15 minutes ago. I'm kind of like finding my way around. It'll probably go through some explanation with some graphics, and the look and feel is important, because if your audience feels comfortable and not intimidated by the amount of content, then that's all the better. So again, it goes through similar steps. You can see that we keep getting into situations where we need to reinstall TensorFlow _ datasets and grab the AG news dataset, and it goes through different operations. This is an important one when we're training large models. The GPU allocation might be problematic depending on the size of the things that you're training. GPU utilization might be a problem. You might not have a dedicated GPU to train, and that's why sometimes the cloud is so much nicer, because we can say, well, I want a machine with this type of GPU, and a GPU that is basically will work well for training this size of data for my model. So depending on where you're training, you will of course see better or worse speeds. So this section goes through RNN, which is the recursive neural network, and it goes and teaches you how to exactly use that on the same data set. So that's another thing that I really like about this module, is that it uses the same data set. So you're not like thrown into like different, I mean, it's already throwing you a lot of different concepts and different techniques that you can apply to text, because you don't need to, like, the recurrent neural network is not needed for absolutely everything that you're doing here. It's giving you different options. I want to also scroll that all the way down here. And again, I'm not going into super detail into all of these things that it's doing here, but I want to get you bidirectional and multi-layer RNNs. So definitely not all of these are applicable. But the next one is the one that one of the ones that I really like, which is getting into the practical side of things. So it's generating text. Now, remember I was talking about news, because the data set is all about news. This section here starts generating text that starts generating text from the news data set. And the text that it generates is kind of funny, because it starts feeling and looking and reading like a newscast, like you're reading a report or the newspaper or the headline on some news website. Again, similar, goes through the installation of data sets and grabbing the AG news data set. It loads and trains the using TensorFlow. It loads the data set, building character vocabulary, all of the steps that you need to really to generate to generate the text, and it goes into a couple of things that are useful. It will start generating titles. That's the thing. It's kind of like headlines. So I'm gonna scroll all the way down, and so that I can show you the nice output. So you can see here I'm almost halfway through and starts getting into generating output, and it goes through. There's a lot of text in these Learn modules, so that's another thing that you might be aware. You don't need necessarily to go through every single cell and explain every single chunk of text that is here. Just remember to highlight the things that are interesting to you or that you want to emphasize the better, because that will allow you to make it more interesting. Like if I'm interested in generating output and you can see I'm excited about it and I'm scrolling down, that might be a good way to keep your audience engaged as well. So let me show you a little bit. Like, I'm so happy that they saved the output on these cells, because then you will see that what that output looks like. Sampling output during training, which is a kind of like a tricky thing, because they determined that there's no accuracy metric on what this thing is generating. It just reads a load of text and tries to generate these titles, but like what type of metric could you say is like, oh, this looks great and this one doesn't? It's just it's very subjective. What seems okay to me might not be okay to you. So what this thing does here is the sampling. It just starts spitting out sample text that it's generating, and you can see here. I forgot what there's one or two words that is using to kind of like start, kind of like to give a starting position for generating text, and you can see here, where is it? Strike in Iraq, to strain, but you can see there's some deficiencies, right? To strain, to start. So it's not really good. There's a little bit of Iraq there, because at the time I think this data set was generated, was created, there was a lot of things happening in Iraq, unfortunately. All right. I think it's today the word. So today of the second, the company, and a second. So there's a little bit of issues there, but this is good, because the module will tell you like what this type of situation is and how to fix it, how to improve it, and how to make it better. I'll go. Yeah, so there we go. So the word that it starts is today. So it starts generating the text, and it basically starts writing the code as, hey, if my text were to start with today, what are the possible next words that will come afterwards? And because you've trained the model all with that, then you will be able to start generating based on that. Again, Iraq, you can see Moscow, President Sutel to returning the takeover. So, I mean, it's kind of funny, but and it tells you a little bit about the temperature and what that means, and then it finally gets into the check your knowledge. Now, the check your knowledge, if you've never used a Learn module before, it's just between 3 and 5 questions. I think we have 5 questions we have here. Kind of like gauge your understanding of the things and the concepts that you've covered in the Learn module. So if you're giving this workshop, you might have like talked a little bit about certain things. If you're giving the workshop, you don't need to necessarily go through every single question. You saw that I had the questions in the slides. If you want to use them, you can use them there. But I want to think about these questions as like a good way of engaging with your audience if you want to see kind of like what their level of understanding is for some of the concepts that you've explained. Here you can see these questions are not also too complicated. They try to be very, very basic, but still pretty good. You can see here, like, hey, generate new funny words for children books. What would I use? And then you go through some of these options, and then you check your answers, and then that's it. That's kind of like um, goes through the all of the contents, and I think that's 6 of 7, and then you get to the summary as well, just kind of like the all-encompassing summary of what you just covered, and what are some of the next steps that you might want to use. I've used BERT before. I really like the there's an Onyx model with Roberta using BERT that I really like for sentiment analysis. That's pretty cool. And you can see here my module is incomplete because I started skipping so that I could show you the interesting parts without running out of time. All right, so that completes kind of like the overview, the brief overview of what this workshop is about, what the content is. I'm gonna go back to the README here, and it gives you a little bit. The repository goes about a few high-level things that you will learn, and you know, I grabbed some screenshots so you could see a little bit of how that looks like. I think I generated this one, and you can see here there's a lot of Moscow and things in there. Little Red Riding Hood. I don't know how that got into the text generation, but these should give you a good idea of what you're working with. And it gives you the milestones, which are kind of like the different steps in the Learn module. So I think, you know, if you're interested in NLP, natural language processing, I think this module is pretty good, pretty interesting. It's very heavy uh, on the concepts at the very beginning, but it starts getting more fun towards the end on the practical side of things. I really like the practical thing, hands-on. Let's generate some text and let's see some stuff happening. Yeah, so the next steps, there's, if you want to know more about TensorFlow, there's more TensorFlow and more advanced TensorFlow in the learning path. There's actually one that is kind of like all the TensorFlow fundamentals, which, like I said, another learning path that has everything that you might need. And as practice, I use some of the well, it's not really pre-trained. Well, he does use pre-trained models, but limited results. So you can try and use different models or different data sets. We use the AG News data set. You might, it's like, what, there's perhaps other data sets that you might be more interested in. All right, so we have a few more minutes for questions. Any questions, complaints? Is something not clear about the workshop or about the contents that I went through today? Feel free to either unmute yourself or put it in the chat as well. Everything goes. Anything's valid. Yes, Ricardo, I think you have your hand up. Go for it.
Oh yeah, I was unmuted already. First, thank you for sharing this amazing content and your experience with us. I think it's always beneficial when we have people who are more experienced than us, giving us a different perspective. This is always positive for us. My question is not related to the content itself, but it's something that I find sometimes challenging. Do you have any tips or strategies that you personally use to make sure that your audience engages with the content you're presenting?
Ricardo, that's a great question. That is a very, very good question. Uh, I'm actually happy that you asked this, because like I think I failed to to mention a few of the things that I use. I'll tell you a couple of stories. One is that my brother-in-law, a few years ago, he went to training for he was becoming a manager, transitioning from engineering to being a manager. And one of the things that he needed to do is go through this class that was about public speaking. And in the class, he was singled out as like, "Hey, you come to the front. You're gonna talk about a couple of things for a few minutes." And the teacher said, "Okay, so for 2 minutes, please tell me about the last week, things that happened the last week at work." And so he said, well, he was working in engineering, doing he's an electrical engineer, so he was building these electrical transformers, and they had some issues. So he said, well, we had some issues with electrical transformers, and yeah, we had some production problems, but we managed to solve it. We found the problem, and it was a defective part, and we changed suppliers, and the part is there now, and it's all good. All is good. Okay, great. The teacher says, okay, that's perfect. Now let's talk about something else. Can you talk about 2 minutes about one of your hobbies? What are your hobbies? And he said, well, my main hobby is to do kite surfing. And if you don't know kite surfing, it's like the first time I saw him, it's like I almost fell to the ground, because to me it's super scary. You have like a harness around your waist, and then you're tied to a giant kite, and then with wind you go into the sea, and then you're running you're surfing on the sea with the kite, and then you just it's very if you've never seen it, it's kind of like it's very extreme. So so he started talking for 2 minutes about the kite surfing, and he says, well, I have 4 kites. Like the biggest one is, if there's no wind, I have to use the biggest one, but if there's a lot of wind, then I use the small one, because like otherwise you can die, because like there's a lot of wind coming on, and then it'll pick you up, and you can't use a super big kite when it's super windy, because you can just go all the way up, so you have to better control. And then he finished and he talked for 2 minutes. And then the teacher said to the audience, hey, like, well, which one do you think was more engaging? Which one was more fun? And the audience says, like, well, where he talked about kite surfing. And she asked, like, why do you think that is? Why was it better when he talked about his hobby than when he talked about the stuff that happened at work last week? And the gist of it is, and kind of like answering your question, is that whenever you're excited about something, whenever you're like interested in something, then it makes it just much better, because you're naturally going to want to talk about it. And when we're not super interested about something, like a few things happen, and this is kind of like, well, that's part one of the story. But the other thing is there's a couple of things that happen with your voice, with how you look. Of course, right now we're in Teams, and you have a camera in front of me, so you might not see me how excited I am, but I tend to move tend to move my hands a lot, but that's one thing. But there's a couple of things that happen. So first, your voice, like if you're talking about something that is really boring, or you don't really want to talk about, your tone starts to be like very like monotone. If you hear an elementary kid reading from a book, you'll get that in 2 seconds. And it's like, wow, and I did this, and yeah, I went and worked with the transformers. And so then the tone, the volume is like kind of like the same. When you're excited, your tone goes up and down and up and down. You'll be like, today we're gonna talk about NLP, and you're gonna see that we're gonna use this data set that is pretty good. And so you're like going up and going down and going up and going down. So uh, unknowingly, an audience might be like, ooh, what? Oh, he's going super fast. Oh, he's going super slow. Oh, his tone went up. Oh, his tone went down. And that happens when we're excited about something. I mean, you don't need to be excited about absolutely every single thing, but once you know that there's a thing in your voice that changes when you're excited, and that makes a better delivery, that's super good. Then the other thing is that you have speed. You can go super fast, and you can go super slow, and you can add a pause when you're speaking, and that makes it, you can add a little bit of suspense, and you can lower your voice and say, oh, and now I don't know, we'll see what happens here. Oh, look at that, like we downloaded this thing and it worked, this is great. And so you went from slower to adding a little bit of suspense, and then it was funny because the text generation worked really good. So I think those are things that I usually try to keep in mind. You Once you're aware of some of these things, you'll be a little bit more natural. If what you're presenting is not really interesting to you, it's trickier, but that will give you definitely an idea. I always try to pick things that I really like, so it's not that complicated to me. Text generation is, I actually wrote a chat bot like 10 years ago with none of these advanced libraries. It was using Markov chains, and so this thing would just remember everything that every engineer was talking in the chat, and you could tell the chatbot to tell us to give us a haiku poem, which is I think it's 5 syllables, then 7, and then 5. And grabbing some of the text that was written in that chat room from full of engineers, I mean, it was really, really, really something. But using Markov chains, and really, I think it's really interesting. So hopefully, some of these. Sorry, I think I deviated completely from from your answer, telling stories, but I think that's really nice. And telling stories. Telling stories is great. I don't think I told any stories until you asked me this question, but telling stories about NLP, well, in this case, NLP would have been great. I could have talked about the chatbot, but I was more interested in the delivery details rather than the content itself.
Thank you. You
Yeah.
didn't deviate at all. It was a great answer. Thank you.
Great. Awesome. Any other question? Oh, let me see the chat. Yes, people love stories. Yes. Stories is a great way to engage with your audience. I've written books and done especially with books. I always open chapters with stories, because what I tell people is like, hey, if you want to read a technical book and you don't want the stories, well, you probably want to read a manual. You don't. I mean, I'm taking the chance of like sitting down and writing something. I'm not going to just tell you about once I was writing about logging, and logging is really boring and nobody likes it. In at least in the Python logging module is just horrible, so nobody likes it. And it's like, well, let me tell you about one time that we didn't have logging and how miserable I was because we got into trouble because we couldn't figure out what was going on. And everyone's like, oh, so this guy got into trouble and he couldn't figure it out. And what happened? Oh, everybody was super upset, and we couldn't just figure it out. So now you're like, now that that I told you why this is horrible when you don't have it, let me show you how can you like not be in a situation like what I was. And so that makes it, I think, more interesting when you're talking about anything really. Like you can always associate things. In there was I had to write a chapter about using Onyx and model interoperability. So Onyx is a big part of it. And I open with the different kinds of potatoes that there are in Peru. I was born in Peru, so like I know that there's tons of, like there's over 3,000 varieties of potatoes. So you start reading a chapter of a machine learning book, and it's like, why is this person talking about potatoes in Peru? And what I thought was like, well, it's a perfect way to associate it because a chef might want a specific type of potato. It's still a potato, but different taste. And you can say, oh, well, this type of potato could be really good for this dish and not for that dish. And so I thought it was the perfect scenario to talk about model interoperability and why I think Onyx is kind of interesting and allows you to train things with using, say, for example, TensorFlow, like we've done today, and grab that and have a different output for something else that might be getting deployed into a Raspberry Pi, which might not have all of the things that we need for TensorFlow to run correctly. So stories, I think, are great.